Is this thing still on?
I think they can hear us a bit better now. Should we keep talking?
Of course. Let's say it louder for those in the back. Hi, and welcome to the Gritty Nurse Podcast, an unfiltered discussion about health and healthcare. My name is Amie Archibald-Varley.
And my name is Sarah Fung.
And we are your podcast hosts.
If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, or any other podcast platform, don't forget to hit subscribe so you can get updates on new episodes.
If you love our podcast and our advocacy work, please go to www.grittynurse.com and click on the Support Us button. This will give you access to exclusive episodes and early releases on a monthly basis.
This will help us with the cost of running the podcast, the time and energy to put out awesome and informative episodes. And for that, we thank you and we appreciate you.
You know, I always have to do that every single year. So it's October, and of course, we have to talk about scary stuff. And I know, you folks out there are just like, oh, here they go talking about Halloween. Yeah, Halloween has started for me since September. So I'm just trying to, live my best life because there's only 31 days and we're already at October 3rd. But before we get into this, we actually have a guest. Oh my gosh, should you introduce him? Should I introduce him? This is weird.
How about you introduce yourself, Jordan? That probably would make sense.
Sure. I mean, I've been on the podcast before in the early days. Yeah, my name's Jordan Varley. I am the husband of Amie, and Amie just wanted me to come on and lend my perspective.
Yes, he's going to give us the healthy skeptic perspective because you know what? We did something really cool, Sarah. We actually were able to record a haunted hospitals episode. So, before I chat away, because I can do that. How about you tell us a little bit about how you felt about, doing a haunted hospitals type of episode?
Well, first of all, for anyone who hasn't been listening to the podcast for a while, or maybe if you're new to the podcast, we should explain that we're semi-obsessed with Halloween and all things Halloween. And every year we do a Halloween episode. We might actually do 2 this year, because we're obsessed with ghost stories and spirits and all things, supernatural. But we were asked, I would say back in the spring, to film this episode of Haunted Hospitals, which, if you haven't heard of it, it's a documentary type series where they ask healthcare workers for scary stories of their time in the hospital or wherever they work. And as you tell your story, it's kind of reenacted at the same time by an actor. So kind of, portraying what you went through. And then at the end of each story, they bring on a paranormal expert to try and explain what happened to you. So Amie and I were asked to be on this episode of Haunted Hospitals, and we each have our story and we each have our episode, and it was super cool. It was really fun filming. And I guess, it was really neat to understand the whole production process. And now we're at the point where it's actually going to be released. So this is where we want to talk about that and all the crazy stuff that happened, I guess, from the filming to now, and yeah, like what your experience was. And I think that it was a first for both of us. We're actually gonna have like production credits now. This is a show.
God, we have we need an IMDb page.
Oh my god, I know. And this is a legit show, you guys. This is on Crave for those of you that are listening from Canada. I'm not sure where it's going to be in the States, but it's on Crave. Like, this is legit, right? I mean, it's not just some channel that's going to be on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, no, I don't want to give away the story. We've actually told the story before, but I think seeing it in it represented visually is really, really cool. So I don't want to give away the story, but I think just talking about the experience, because again, we are healthcare providers. We do believe in the science. And again, we have our own experiences with the paranormal or ghosts or whatever the case may be. You're like, "Woo," whatever.
Ooh.
So, I mean, one of the things that I want to throw out there before I throw Jordan as our healthy skeptic is there's actually a lot of stats that talk about the types of people or, the numbers of people who actually believe in ghosts and the paranormal. And maybe this is surprising, maybe it's not, but I found stats that 2 in 5 Americans believe in ghosts, that ghosts are real, and 1 in 5 have seen them. And I've seen recent statistics, I think it was 2019 or what, no, maybe it was later, 2021, that over 50% of people believe in ghosts. Ooh.
Ooh.
Okay, let's do a little quick roundtable. So maybe we'll start with Jordan here. We've set our pieces here. So where do you lie with the believing in ghosts and the spirit, the supernatural?
Absolutely not.
So you're saying 100% you don't believe. Like there's not a little bit of
I don't believe it. I don't believe it for 1 second, Sarah. He's lying.
So let's put it this way. From like the human brain is like bifurcated in all sorts of conflicting modules, right? There's my rational mind doesn't believe in it. And for a variety of reasons we can get into if you want. And of course there is my other modules that are far less rational, that just indicate to me that, or tell me not to play around with things that might happen. It's kind of a in my point, in my rational mind, it's a bug in my probabilistic machinery.
So long story short, he believes in ghosts.
I don't at all. Have I seen a ghost? No. When somebody tells me they've seen a ghost, do I believe them? No. For a variety of reasons, right? I mean, I am not a wholly rational being, and I have to acknowledge that, you know.
mm-hmm.
Sarah, where do you stand on whether you believe in ghosts or not?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that science can't explain. Like, I'm all for science. I believe in science, I believe in evidence, but I feel like not every single thing in the world can be explained by science. And maybe this is one of those things. And when I was doing research for this episode, I came across the same stats as you, Amie, where it says around 45% of Americans believe in ghosts, and 18% will go so far to say they have had contact with a ghost. And just to round out this conversation a little bit, I found this article which has 6 possible scientific explanations for ghosts.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
Let's pause that thought, and then I will jump into in terms of like whether I believe in ghosts. So, I'd like to say that I'm a healthy skeptic, except when it comes to certain things. I don't know. I guess
It's like the
because I
opposite of being a healthy skeptic, by the way.
I guess because I was raised in a household where they talked about things called duppies and ghosts and voodoo and these various different things, that kind of sometimes plays in the back of my mind. Even though, I went to school, I'm well learned, I'm well educated, I guess that folks would say. But just something deep down, that underlying, I'm not really too sure if I could put my finger on it, if it's real or not, just gets to me. So I would say that, I err on the side of caution. I think that's the fairest thing to say. That's just like, all right, I we like I agree with you, Sarah. There's a lot of things that science can't explain, that can't prove. I guess I would say that I'm agnostic. So I do believe that there is a higher power. Now, this is where things get a little fuzzy for me with these, spiritual things. I've had my own little strange kind of phenomena type of things happening. And, maybe it's just because I've overslept or, I put some type of explanation on it. But when it comes to certain things, like, we have that Ouija board. We should pull that out, right?
I have it right here. I still have it right
All
here.
reality, if you really pulled it up, like, fuck, Sarah, we ain't doing this. We're not really gonna, it's just for a show. I don't know, deep down, I'm like, I'm not too sure if I want to mess with that. But rationally, does that even make any sense? As a nurse, someone who studies science, someone who believes in science, is that illogical? So, I would say that I don't know.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm finna explode here.
What did you say? You're finna to explode?
So there's a couple of things. One, if you're agnostic, it means you literally don't know. Agnostic, right? So if you don't know, then that's kind of your position. Is that, or the specifically the agnosticism is the indication that you will never know. It's unknowable, right? So people are agnostic with respect to the existence of God. It just means it's unknowable.
So essentially,
And
I'm right and he's wrong, and we're gonna move to
Ouch.
the next
anyway,
person.
and then there's the other component where, you know, the whole science doesn't know, so therefore X, Y, and Z. That's like a traditional like argument. That's called the God of the gaps argument. So people historically have just kind of looked for gaps in what our knowledge is or our scientific explanations, and then just use God to fill in the gaps rather than just acknowledging that we just don't know. Because of course, some of those gaps have been subsequently filled, right?
We're gonna turn him into a believer by the end of the
It's a
episode.
hard no. So anyway, yeah. So there's the whole God of the gaps argument. So yeah, I mean, I'm just not terribly convinced that supernatural things exist, and I can get into a whole slew of explanations as to why that is, and why people see weird things, and or why, from an evolutionary perspective, we're inclined to believe that these things exist. But suffice it to say, my conclusion is fairly rock solid.
You know, it'd be so
But also,
fun.
that being said, I would
Yeah.
not play with a Ouija board.
right.
Because
See,
So
at the end of the day,
remember
I'm
last year,
still
you
Indian, so
you forced me to buy a Ouija board, Amy, and you're like, we're gonna do an episode where we play with
okay,
it.
maybe I'll do it. Maybe I'll do
And
it.
then I go to bring the Ouija board out, and you're like, no, we're not messing with it. I talked to so and so who's a psychic, and she's like, you don't rip a like hole in the, I don't want to say like the
You
time
don't.
space continuum, but you don't speak to the spirits that close to Halloween. And I was like, oh, what am I doing with this now?
I think it was.
time space
I think it
continuum. It's
was.
hilarious.
That it was too close to Halloween, and I think she said that the veil between the supernatural and the natural world was too thin. So that's why. Shut up,
Is
Jordan.
that testable?
That's why we didn't use the Ouija board that time. And you know what? I'm not trying to mess with things. And if there's a chance that perhaps she was right, we erred on the side of caution and are still here today to have this episode. So, Sarah, you get into those stats that you were going to tell us a little bit about.
As we were talking, though, I actually just thought of something. Wouldn't it be so cool if we were asked to complete a research study on ghost stories? And it was like, let's say it was like a qualitative research study, and we interviewed all these people and we themed their responses. I'm like, now that would be a fun research study. But
It
I
would be.
digress.
It might.
Wouldn't
It
it be
might be
fun?
dangerous, though. Maybe it's
But I'm like,
dangerous.
who would fund that? Like, I don't know of any reputable organization that would fund that for us.
Who knows? We just have to ask the right
I'm sure
questions,
there are a
right?
ton of unreputable.
I
How
know.
dare
Whoever's
you?
listening right now, let
How
us know.
dare you? You stop that. All right.
Okay, all right. So let's talk about some science here. And according to this article, there are 6 possible scientific reasons for ghosts. Number 1, low frequency sound. So it says that obviously there are sounds that we can hear and sounds that we can't hear. And when it gets to such a low level that you can't hear, there was actually a study conducted by I guess a company that focused on concert goers, and when they were exposed to sounds at 17 hertz, they reported feeling uneasy or sorrowful, getting chills or nervous feelings of revulsion and fear. So it was a sound that they couldn't hear, but they could kind of feel, I guess, because it was so low, and it made them feel like really negative emotions. So that's one possible explanation. The second one I found kind of funny. It says mold. So breathing in toxic mold can be bad for your respiratory system. Now that's something we understand, but it can also be bad for your brain. Exposure to mold is known to cause neurologic symptoms such as delirium, dementia, or irrational fears. So
Okay.
so is
What?
it a coincidence that the houses we suspect are haunted also tend to be in disrepair and so quite possibly full of toxic mold?
Oh my gosh. These are the answers we've been seeking.
So,
Mold?
Amy, did your childhood home have mold in it?
Maybe. Like, I mean, it was an older home, right? So when I think back to that place, shush. When I think
He's not
back to
saying
that,
anything.
he's giving me the eye. When I think back to that place, it was an older home. Like, I think we were getting close to the 20-25 year. No, it was over 25 years because my parents had paid it off. So yeah, maybe there was mold. But maybe there wasn't mold.
So we
Well,
don't actually
listen, I'm
know.
just going to interject here and be like, say like, well, could be the mold is one possible explanation. There's also the explanation that, you know, a lot of people have these experiences, at least in my limited experience with this kind of stuff, around the time that they're sleeping, falling asleep, or have fallen asleep. So, and there's so many things that happen to the brain at that time that we don't even really understand fundamentally. The knowledge that we have about sleep itself is so limited. It's still a huge mystery, despite the fact that we have fMRIs and all this stuff. That it's really hard to kind of jump to the supernatural conclusion before you kind of eliminate all of the natural conclusions, right?
Who
And that's
says we
that God of the
haven't?
gaps impulse. It's like, well, we don't understand sleep, so all the dreams must have these like supernatural meanings, or you know, when I wake up and I'm like still half in the bag, that somehow that I'm bridging the gap between two realms or whatever.
This guy has not seen the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Okay, I'm sorry.
Proceed, Sarah, please.
Okay.
So we've got low frequency sounds that are so low you can feel them, but you can't hear them.
Yes,
We've
yes.
got mold that can make you like, ooh. What's the next one?
Okay, next one, carbon monoxide. Just
Oh,
as breathing in mold could lead us to see, hear, and feel things that aren't normally there, so too can breathing in too much carbon monoxide.
yeah, it can also lead to death.
And I'm thinking, like, I'm trying to think of when carbon monoxide detectors became like a thing that you had to have in your house, because it wasn't always something you had to have. So maybe we were exposed to like low levels of carbon monoxide all through our childhood and we didn't know it. But it also said that before a carbon monoxide gas leak poisons us, it can cause auditory hallucinations, a feeling of pressure on your chest, and an unexplained feeling of dread.
Yeah, that's because you're about to die from carbon monoxide poisoning. That's why. And of course, like, I mean, I'm glad that we have carbon monoxide detectors because I think before this, I remember as a child when we were growing up hearing about like the most horrible things happening to families when, they didn't have a carbon monoxide. Essentially, that these folks would go to sleep and just never wake up. That's a phenomenon in itself that's super scary because, it's undetectable. It's odorless. It's colorless. You can't smell it. So again, I mean that whole aspect is scary. But I mean, yeah, like I don't know if I would. I don't know how that made it to the list. But anyways,
I
we'll leave it
know.
there.
Okay, so let's go on to number 4. And Jordan, I think you'll appreciate this one, the power of suggestion. So, studies suggest that we are more likely to believe in a paranormal experience if someone else who was there can back up our belief. So, while we might be able to convince ourselves that we were somehow mistaken about what we saw or heard, we tend to put more stock into someone else's witness account if it also backs our suspicions. So, our belief in ghosts can be catching. So, like, let's say you and me, Amy, both experienced some supernatural effect. The fact that we both experienced it, like, then I feel like I'm not crazy for thinking what happened because you were there too.
Well, because you're not.
I know.
But I mean, I think like I guess the power of suggestion is very powerful. I think about, just my own circumstances and issues, or I shouldn't say issues, but my own interactions with, even this own episode, sorry, even the episode that we talked about where we talked about our experiences. I mean, it was real to us whether or not that these things could be explained. It's still those feelings were real. So for example, when I was feeling like I could hear my own voice, or sorry, my own breathing, or hear how loud my heartbeat was, or that the room seemed really, really cold. All those things were real. It's not that those things weren't happening. And of course, I think there was a tone that was set with the story that was told prior to me going to this room. The whole mood was set. And of course, it would create all of these various different anxieties. But again, I think I'm a rational person. And sometimes irrational things happen. And I don't know, maybe it was there are all these various different explanations, but again, I just don't know.
I hazard to interject one thing that I tend to tell people just because I found it interesting when I learned about it, and it kind of sets the tone for like how I think about how the human perceptual system works. Like, we have a brain that is the most complex formation of matter in the solar system, if not the galaxy. So that's 100 billion neurons with 10 times as many connections between them. And a lot of our sensory apparatus are completely inferential. So the data comes in, the data is too much for our brains to handle, and our brain has to sift through what is important and what isn't important in a very short period of time. Like, most people don't even realize that they have a optical blind spot and they've had it their entire life, because your brain literally just colors it in. Your brain infers that this area shouldn't be blind and then colors it in. What else could it fool you into thinking? And that's just your visual system. Then you get into your auditory system. Then you can get into your kinesthetics, or your proprioceptive systems, or your enteric systems, where your body senses things, right? So a lot of the explanations we have for things that we can't explain involve kind of anthropomorphizing data. Like you and I have discussed it. Like, when I had that when I had that experience with sleep paralysis, despite all of my vaunted skepticism, I woke up, couldn't move my body. The first thing I thought was, there's a demon in the room.
Because there was.
And it has its hand on my chest and I can't move, and it's slowly crushing my chest. And I was awake. I just couldn't move my body. But that's because
He was in the dream world.
because my brain didn't evolve to give me all of the right information about the world. My brain evolved in the context of in a situation where the thing that was likely going to be attacking me was either another human or a creature.
I think you're wrong. And hold on, Sarah. I think he's wrong. You want to know why? I think
Why?
what our brains are saying is, you fuck around, you find out. And that's why we react in these situations. And that we're, for example, you were doing your thing, you're trying to get that baby to where it needs to go, and you're just like, nope, it's time to go. Same with me, where I was like, I'm not waiting around to find out what is there. It's that relationship of like, no, we're not trying to do this, and it keeps us safe.
Well, that's exactly it. We have something called the negativity bias. So when we see a rock through a cusp of trees, we don't know if that rock is the shoulder of a lion or a rock. Now, the idiots in our tribes who thought that ain't no lion and walked towards it, and it turned out 1% of the time to be a lion, they're dead and they didn't get the chance to make babies. The ones who said, no, that might be a lion, and they go the opposite way,
But
tended to survive.
So
And that feature of our psychology passed on to subsequent
that is
generations.
the same thing with a duppy. Like, if it's a ghost, it's the same thing.
Oh my gosh, I wish, like, when you did that episode with Matt, I wish you'd explain to me what a duppy was, because I spent that whole episode trying to figure out what you guys were talking about. And then you tell me at the very end that duppy is just another word for ghost. And I'm like, oh, so this would have made so much sense if I'd known that. But I think
So in Grenada they call
yeah,
it a jumby. In Jamaica they call it a duppy, and I'm
yeah.
sure in every culture they have
Yeah,
various different names.
there's got there's gotta be
Gin, or
different
they're
names.
called
Yeah.
whatever, right?
Well, I
I'm not
mean, in
sure.
Cantonese we call it guai, so it's like it's just a name for ghost. And I think that in every culture there is some variation of like a ghost, right? The idea of a ghost. So it's pretty prevalent, I would say. Like you said, Jordan, when we don't understand something, especially in when we were in primitive societies, we just fill in the gaps with things that make sense to us. And ghosts made sense to us at the time. Um, do you want me to get into number 5, or should we
Yeah,
talk a
keep
little bit
going.
more about the dream world? Because I
No,
feel
keep
like
going.
we were okay. So, so number 5 is drafts, like air drafts.
Just air
Um,
drafts.
so as the days get hotter and air conditioning becomes more and more expensive, this person says, I rely more on opening windows to cool my home. Opening windows can create a nice breeze, but it can also create cold spots as airflow outside changes, causing cooler air to enter a warmer room. So I guess, long story short, when you don't know what's happening and you feel a draft, you might just interpret that as a spirit or a being that is like breathing down your neck or whatever on your body and freak you out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's kind of like the classic, a ghost is in the room or whatever. I think we've seen it play out in various different tropes in movies where, you walk into the room and all of a sudden you could see the breath, the cold air from your breath. and like things can start getting all cold in the room, like almost to the point where it's freezing, right? I'm so excited about this. So, but I mean, yeah, like that's kind of one of the classic signs, telltale signs that there is, a ghost around or a foot. And I think that, for example, my specific experience, that room was very close to the operating room, and the operating theater is always cold. They keep the temperature down. So, I mean, the room was it was freezing because it was probably close in relation. But yes, that is a classical trope in terms of, the temperature goes down, you know how it works. And the movies are like walking around and they're like, do you feel that? Oh,
All of a
it's so
sudden you see
cold.
your breath, right? Like it's
Yeah.
cold.
But bear in mind too, right? And I think most of us have experienced this. Like you, in a situation like you go down to your basement to get something, the lights are off. You, for a split second, your brain says, "What if there was a ghost down here?"
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the room gets cold. Now, is it true that the room is getting cold, or is it the fact that you just experienced fear, and now all of a sudden the blood has left your extremities and gone
Oh,
straight to
this
your
guy's being
legs as
scientific.
a fight or flight response, and all of a sudden your breathing increases, your heart starts beating in your ears, then hairs on the back of your neck start standing up. Like, it's kind of, and in some respects it's like mistaking it's like the chicken or the egg, right? It's like, the causal reaction, we reverse it in our mind afterward, but really what happened was you scared yourself. The fear of the unknown, again, that negativity bias, like, oh, if there's like a 1% chance that there's something down here that I can't see because I'm in the dark, then I'm going to boot upstairs. I don't care how stupid I look or sound to my wife, who can hear my thumping up the stairs. Is like, why are you running up the stairs? Like, there's clearly no goblins in the house.
Like when I watched the first Home Alone movie, I was scared for years of the
Oh my
basement
god.
and the furnace. Like, do you remember how the furnace was like evil? Like, it scared me until probably I was 10.
Well, I mean, again, that's just another classic scary place, right? Like basements, attics, cellars, all these areas tend to be again cold. Oh my gosh, it's meeting all the criteria. Cold, potentially moldy, where you might hear various different types of sounds. Like, yeah, like these are kind of the
And they tend to
things.
have very limited numbers of exits.
Yeah,
Oh my
see?
god, you're so
There.
right. You're
But
so
the thing
right.
is, like, I think of course the science is there where it's of course these are this is the autonomic response, right? Your body is doing the things that it needs to do to keep itself safe. And of course, if you're feeling, oh, I need to leave this space or I need to move away, it's because your body is actually giving you signals to do so. Now again, whether there's a ghost there or not, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But again, I don't know. I'm very hesitant to turn to someone and be like, yeah, that just wasn't real. Because like, I mean, I just don't know.
Mhm. I
I
agree.
think, I mean, listen, I think it's helpful. I mean, it certainly hasn't, it doesn't make a lot of friends to tell people your actual thoughts on this stuff. But, at the end
What
of the
are you
day,
talking about? We're telling like 30,000 people right
no,
now
I
our
mean, like, so
actual
if somebody
thoughts.
comes to you and says, oh, a ghost chased me up the stairs from my basement last night. And your first response is, well, it could have been explained by any number of, you know, psychological or, you know, external factors that you interpreted as being some ghost, but it could have just been these external factors that you interpreted as being a
Well,
ghost.
yeah,
Nobody wants you
we're
to
gonna
be
start with the
like,
rational stuff
I
first.
was really, come on. People don't start with the rational stuff first.
Of
That's the
course,
problem.
Sarah, you would start with the rational stuff first, right? You'd be
You
like,
know
hey,
what? The nurse in me is saying you need to validate what the person is saying and,
I love it.
use reflective listening and don't discount their experience. But then in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking, what the heck are they talking
For
about?
those of you who have no tact like me, then you just jump straight to the keeping it real part.
Yeah, right. You're not gonna be like that.
I
Look,
have been like
Sarah,
that.
drop that Ouija board over tomorrow. We'll see. We'll see what side of the fence this guy
Okay, I
leans
actually will
on.
do that, and you'll see. You'll freak out. You'll just open your front door, and it'll be there staring at you.
Listen, I'm not saying I'm some paragon of logic or rationality. I'm not. I'm just a bald ape like everybody else on the planet. But so I'm just as prone to the same idiotic BS that everybody else is. The whole point, like, listen, the whole reason why the first thought in your head when you're downstairs in the dark, knowing that you're getting all cold and scared, the first thing in your head is, oh man, it's a demon, and you run out of the basement, is because your brain doesn't want you to sit there and ponder through a whole like, it's called type 2 thinking. And if you people, for people who are into this type of thing, so it's type 1 thinking and type 2 thinking. Type 2 thinking is like deliberative and rational, and you go step by step and you come up with as many good reasons for things as possible. And then there's type 1 thinking, which is what your brain wants you to do, which is just get the fuck out of the basement and worry about the reason why you wanted to get out of the basement later, because you have nothing to lose by running out of the basement. You have something potentially to lose by staying in the basement, and all your brain wants you to do is maximize your chance of survival and passing on your genes. So you can't do that if you're dead. So at the end of the day, like, I am as susceptible to these things as anybody else, but also once I'm out of the basement, then I wouldn't try to rationalize it, quote unquote, by going outside of the physical world, because once you start going to the supernatural first, you're not following kind of like the basic, what in my opinion are the basic kind of skeptical decision making process, right? Which is eliminate all the natural explanations first and then go to the supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, and then if you run out of natural explanations, then you still have all of the gaps in our scientific knowledge and kind of the knowledge of our rationality, right? Like, you would think, oh, this thumping in the basement is a demon walking up behind you, or it could be expanding pipes that you didn't realize were in that wall, right?
Or it could be a demon walking up behind you.
Or it could be an animal that's stuck in your attic and is trying frantically to get out and then jumps out at you when you open the closet door. That did happen to us.
Or it could be a demon looking after you. Yeah. So Sarah, what's number 6? What's the sixth thing?
All right, let's bring this full circle now. So number 6 is that we just enjoy being afraid. Neurologists have found that our brains release dopamine, which is a chemical associated with pleasure, when we are afraid. Exactly how much dopamine and how many receptors we have for receiving it can influence whether or you are a person that enjoys being frightened or someone who would rather avoid scary movies or rides altogether. So it's a little bit boring, but sometimes we just enjoy it. It's good entertainment. It helps us explain a lot of things that can't be explained. It allows us to believe in an existence after death, which ultimately can be comforting.
Listen, it's October 3rd, and by Saturday I will have been to Casa Loma 3 times. So I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just ever since I was a child, I didn't even know where my kind of love for horror movies and, all things scary. I don't even know really where it came from. Like, I know my brother is into like all sorts of different films, but I don't know. Like, I try to think about like what my first horror movie was, and I don't recall whether it was The Exorcist or whether it was like A Nightmare on Elm Street, but I just remember
It's called starting off in the deep end, kids.
Yes,
I just
yes, that wouldn't be allowed these days.
No. Oh, I mean, anyways, I just remember like seeing it and just I was scared. I was terrified, but then it was just like, so what other scary movies are there out there? What other types of things can I watch? And I remember, eventually watching like the Alien movies and, Creep Show and all these other really great horror movies, Night of the Living Dead. I could start listing them off. And I guess the reality of it is, deep down, I guess I like being scared. That sounds so messed up. It sounds like I need to see someone for therapy.
I mean, you saw a lot of movies, right? So my childhood is that I watched a lot of X-Files, and this probably messed my mind up a little bit because I like really dark things still. And I like shows like Ozark, Breaking Bad, like those type of shows. But on the flip side, I like really random funny shows too. So I don't know. It's just, I remember watching X-Files and being glued to the couch, and I didn't even want to step down because I was afraid that something was under the couch because it freaked me out so bad.
Was it the guy who could stretch with the yellow eyes?
Well, there was that, but there was this one
wouldn't go on the
episode
toilet for a week because that guy came out of a toilet.
There was this one character that was like had tattoos like puzzle pieces all over his body, and it was like he was like blue. And then there was another episode where like an alien like forced its way out of someone's abdomen and like ripped it apart in the process. And then there was like spontaneous combustion. Like I said, I don't think I should have been watching this when I was like 9 or 10. I definitely should not have been watching it.
Well, like, listen, like one of the, I think at least I've done a little bit of reading about why people like horror movies and theme park rides and stuff like that. And I mean, everybody's different in terms of their threshold for this type of stuff. Some people really like the adrenaline. They like experiencing what it would be like to be thrown up in the air in the case of a roller coaster, or stalked by a serial killer in
No, I
like
don't want to be
a movie.
stalked.
No, it stalked. I mean, like they're walking you down, like they're going to kill you, but without any of the consequences. So you get all of that rush of adrenaline, endorphins, but you don't have any of the downside, which is the death and maiming part.
Right, right,
And
right.
then of course people get something different out of comedies, right? Like it's a completely different facet of our psychology that gets something out of comedies, and a different again facet of something that we get out of like science fiction and stuff like that. So I think people like Amie who really like horror movies really like that kind of exploring kind of the macabre, the dark side of life. It's kind of like you're running simulations, right? You're like, okay, so what would it be like to die in this way? What would it be like?
No, that is
What would
not
it be
where
like
my
to be?
mind is
What would it be
going.
like to be on a roller coaster that flies off? In the case of like Final Destination, flies off the tracks. And I think the thrill of it is, oh, okay, well that's terrifying, and I lived, right? It's the same reason people start cackling after they've, some people anyway, start laughing uncontrollably when they've thrown themselves out of a plane and pulled a parachute. It's because their brain gets in this hyper excited state because it thinks it's going to die, and then when it lives, your brain wants to crank that dial all the way the other way to try and get your neurological system back to kind of some level of homeostasis. And sometimes that results in this feeling of euphoria because you just quote unquote survived the incident.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I get into that much detail when I'm
I
watching
do.
a horror movie. I think just for me, I don't know, it's just something that I find all of those sensations, I guess, very interesting. And I just find the concepts that people come up with when it comes to horror movies, because I like a good ghost horror movie. Like I'm not into these slasher films where like someone's running around and they're getting murderated by somebody, or serial killers like Dom, like those things really actually freak me out. Like those, because like thinking about the human mind and how humans can interact with each other in that type of psychopathy is actually quite terrifying. So for me, those types of movies, those types of films are really, really unnerving. I mean, I think everyone's been talking about this the Netflix Dahmer show, and I think we watched like one or two episodes, and it's, for me it's very, very unnerving, because that there's a very real fear that there are individuals still amongst us that behave in this way, and that, of course, back then they didn't really have the greatest technology in terms of capturing these types of individuals. So for me, that is the true horror film. Those are the true scary things. When I'm watching a horror movie with ghosts, demons, goblins, whatever, I know at the end of the day, when that movie turns off, that those things aren't coming for me. So, I mean, I think that's where, for me, the element of being able to dabble into something, learn about those types of things, knowing that they're not real, isn't very fearful for me. But there is a very real fear of individuals who act and behave in a certain way. And that's what really scares me at the end of the day.
Well, bear in mind that there's some people who theorize that our werewolf legends, our vampire legends,
Oh,
our
people believe in
goblin
those things,
legends,
yeah.
all of those legends that we no longer believe are real, all may have been derived from the fact that actual serial killers, which have existed since humans, from our nascent stages of human development, were actually predating other humans, right? We're an apex predator. We're not a very, physically intimidating apex predator, but only hunter of the only hunter of apex predators or other apex predators, meaning that our own kind of fellow humans. And so rather than, admit that a human could eat another person or horribly torture and maim another person, because it's so hard to get our minds around how a person could do that, we came up with legends and myths to explain these atrocities that at the time I'm sure were difficult to solve and whatever. And so we came up with these. Well, it must have been a werewolf because no human could tear a person apart like that, kind of thing, right? So I think there's something to be said for why that movie Dahmer and other kind of serial killer type shows tend to fascinate people, but also kind of really deeply trouble people, because there's this, how can a quote unquote regular person, meaning a person who's just like everybody else, they have the same neurons and everything like that, how can they become so depraved?
Right. And I think this is getting into the true crime, right? Like there's this fascination with true crime and the shock value, but then there are things that are like psychological thrillers, which are kind of, they're scary in a different way. And then there are those slasher films, which I also don't think I can watch. And there are those scenes where someone's chasing someone and they're like that close to catching them. And those are the ones that I can't handle. I'm just like, oh, like get away already. But I think at the end of the day, it's just like we all like different things. And Amie and I, and we love hearing from other people what their ghost stories are. And we actually want to do another episode. So if anyone listening wants to share their ghost story with us, email us grittinurses@gmail.com, send us a Twitter or an Instagram message, and we'd love to do another episode where we can actually share some of your stories and let everyone know what they are, and maybe even just like put our own little opinions or spin on what we think happened.
Absolutely. And I have one last question to go round. As healthcare providers, do you think we lose credibility talking about ghosts and supernatural things? I'll pass it to you, Sarah.
I don't know that you would lose credibility. I mean, it's not like you're recommending anybody to go
Ghost treatment.
ghost hunting. You're not telling someone, like, we're not really telling patients or anyone to throw salt over their shoulder. Like, I think this is just completely separate from nursing. I don't think it would. I hope it doesn't make people think less of us. I think it's just the entertainment factor and the fact that we've experienced things that we can't explain. And if you watch us on Haunted Hospitals, we both talk about, at least I talk about the fact that I never really shared these stories with my coworkers because I thought nobody would believe me. So maybe at the time I thought people would think less of me, but now I think it's just more fun and entertainment.
What do you say, Jordan?
There was some study years ago that kind of, they surveyed people in kind of various professions within, the scientific profession, or and doctors and nurses and stuff like that, to determine what, whether they believe in God, whether they believe in the supernatural and stuff like that, by extension. And there so it was like something like 90 something percent of scientists didn't believe in anything supernatural. And then that number dropped like very considerably, with doctors and nurses and people in the medical profession. So far higher percentage of doctors and nurses believed in something supernatural. And that's not, it's not hard to understand why. I mean, for one, doctors and nurses are practitioners of kind of scientific findings. They're not immersed in kind of scientific research and the kind of scientific uh, process on a day-to-day basis, like people who have like PhDs and are actively conducting research. So there's that. And then on top of that, doctors and nurses see horrible things all the time, on average, right? Like they experience death in a very visceral way, in a way that most people don't experience it. So despite all of their, you know, knowledge and their understanding of the scientific method, the things they experience, really, in order to cope with, I think, you know, that they do resort to or lean on kind of a belief in the supernatural, either because it gives them hope, or it lends, meaning to the events that they experience that they can't explain, or that are would be meaningless otherwise, that this kind of lends meaning to these kind of the chaos that they experience. So I think there's all sorts of possible reasons why nurses believe in this thing and doctors believe in these things. And I don't think that they should be looked down upon. I think, like you said, Sarah, it's at minimum entertaining. And I find it entertaining. I watch supernatural movies. I've indulged myself in supernatural beliefs. I've had the thrill of running up my stairs away from gremlins and stuff like that. And just at the end of the day, kind of, how do you get through life experiencing kind of the worst 20 minutes of everybody else's life? And, at a certain point, you just kind of have to pick whatever coping mechanism you can to get through. So I don't hold it against anybody.
Good, because I was about to cuss you out if you had said something otherwise. So, just with me, kind of with the last final words, I'm not going to get into too much detail because I think Sarah and Jordan kind of covered the bulk of it. Again, I don't think, any healthcare provider or anybody out there talking about the supernatural or whatever. I mean, again, I think that's their own personal experience. We're not providing treatment based on these experiences. We're not like, oh, here's a special pill that you could take to, whatever, deal with whatever you're seeing or whatever the case may be. Again, obviously, we're not talking about individuals who are having a full separation of reality versus, not reality. So we're not talking about mental health either. This is a fun topic, and I think that that's, if there's anything anybody should take away, it's that, every once in a while we need to laugh a little bit. We need to suspend our ability to or suspend our thoughts and our rational mind just to have a little bit of fun. And I think that's more what it is. And I think that, I would never look down on someone who has this experience or who has maybe even not had these types of experiences. Again, I just think it's so personal to the individual, and I would never look down on anybody for having these conversations. And again, I think, like I said, it's all fun, and I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't make you any less of a practitioner whether you believe or that you don't believe.
All
So
right.
that's where I stand. Woo!
And thanks, Jordan, for coming on again. We appreciate it. It's been a while. You were on one of our earliest episodes, and now you're back again. So this is awesome. And yeah, we would love to hear your ghost stories. So send them to us.
Absolutely. Have a good night, everyone.
Nice.
Do, 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 do.